What up? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And look at you. You done stumbled upon little OTB Saints, where we bring you all the latest black and gold coverage.
Who are the Saints going to draft? Who's going to be their quarterback? What does the salary cap look like? All that information and more.
Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe. I think when you look at this New Orleans Saints team, the question marks on both sides of the ball are mainly in the trenches, right? Like you have other ones like, okay, who's going to be the, now that Caden Ellis is gone, who's going to be the third linebacker for this Saints team? Like there is stuff like that. As we mentioned yesterday, right? Who's going to win the Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor, Bradley Roby? Like how's that going to shake out? But the difference is you feel great about your first two linebackers and you feel great about that secondary as a whole and whoever wins those jobs. When it comes to the offensive and defensive lines, if things go awry, it could sink the entire season. And that's not an exaggeration. On the D-line, you have obviously Peyton Turner, who we talked about quite a bit yesterday. And then while I believe in Granderson, you could consider him a question mark, being the role he's going to be asked to fill is going to be larger than ever. You have all new interior guys. You're trying to prove that you can hit on the defensive line, first-round pick with Brzee. And then offensively, obviously, guys like Cesar Reeves, Andrews Pete, and Trevor Penning going to go so far to determining kind of the ceiling of this football team. And what's interesting, I think, about this team, Jake, is because you do seem so solid at the skill positions, you got a pretty good quarterback in Carr. And defensively, like I said, you love the secondary and everything. It's like if you are good up front, well, you could be pretty damn frisky. You could maybe even be a bit better than people are giving you credit for. Like people are saying, yeah, you're going to win the South, but you're not going to really be able to make any noise. I don't know. Like if you're good in the lines, like you could fight for a playoff win and kind of see where it goes. But if you're not, it could go so badly that you could like miss the playoffs entirely. So it's a bit of a nerve-wracking spot to be entering with your question marks where it all starts up front.
Yeah, and I have more questions probably in the offensive line than I do the actual defensive line because you signed some veteran players to play defensive tackle. You drafted one in the first round. I mean, you mentioned Granderson. That's somebody you can count on. You've been able to count on him in the past. Now, to the level that he's played the last year with the 8 sacks, like you hope so. But even if you get his best, I still think that's going to help you win games. You get Foskey there in the second round. So you've got resources put into that defensive line here in this offseason between the draft and free agency. So offensive line, we've talked about that. You mentioned quickly there linebacker. Behind Pete Warner and Demario Davis, you got Zach Bond, you've got Andrew Dow, DeMarco Jackson, and Ryan Conley.
Yeah.
That's a position group that if you get one guy hurt, and you don't worry about Demario Davis getting hurt, you worry about Pete Warner because of his history getting hurt. And that's a position where you don't have a fallback guy. Now, I like Jackson. I think at App State, he was one of my favorite draft choices in his class. You got him in the later rounds. I believe he was a 5th-round guy. He's shown flashes, but he's unproven. So offensive line, yes, but also that linebacker room because you've got to have somebody step up because Pete Warner is going to miss games. That's what his career has kind of told us. The way he plays kind of a reckless style, which I appreciate. But I'm a little worried about that position room right now because defensive line, we don't know, but you have resources through the draft, first and second round, and 2 veteran players you've gone out and signed. So that room probably more than the defensive front, if we're talking about the front 7 of the defense, worries me.
And what the stakes are, I would say, as high as they've ever been, because if it does go awry at linebacker, D-line, O-line, whatever, and you do end up sucking, then all the effort that you expended these last couple of off seasons trying to solidify this team, it all goes out the window. And Dennis Allen ends up fired. And you have to enter you're suddenly talking about a completely new era of Saints football taking place, which is potentially a bit awkward when you consider that you just committed to Derek Carr for relatively long term. This isn't like a 1-year deal or something like that. Make no mistake. I mean, for Dennis Allen, this is playoffs or bust. Like, I cannot see him being brought back if they don't make the playoffs this year. So high stakes with some questions at some pretty critical positions for the New Orleans Saints. Murray, you found some pretty interesting numbers here concerning Derek Carr that should potentially make Saints fans feel a bit better about this. How do you want What's the best way to communicate this?
So when the Saints first signed Derek Carr, I talked to my buddy Harry Ruiz, who's the Spanish play-by-play voice for the Raiders. And his first thing that he told me why Saints fans should be positive and optimistic about Derek Carr is because he's never played with a defense as good as the Saints have. And I went back over the years, the 9 years that Derek Carr has been in the league, the Raiders have never finished better than 20th in scoring defense.
Oof.
They were 26th last season. And that's just points that, defense gives up, not an end-all, be-all stat, but he's been behind on the scoreboard most of his career in Oakland. So hopefully that's not the case in New Orleans.
Well, and that would also kind of check out with a couple of other stats around Carr. I think it's like since 2017 he leads the NFL in like comebacks or game-winning drives, and well, that would speak to maybe a defense that's putting you in tough situations that you're having to overcome. You mentioned never ranked higher than 20th, and that maybe becomes a bit extra intriguing because one of the years in which they were 20th was 2016, which of course was when they went 12-4, and Derek Carr had his best year as a professional. That's a long time ago, but I mean in 2018, 32nd, 24th, 30th, 26th, 26th. Like the Saints, I would imagine, I feel very confident saying they will be a top 10 scoring defense in the entire NFL. So now it's on Derek Carr to prove that he really was being hamstrung, and that it wasn't him kind of maybe influence the defense by putting them in bad situations at times.
And on the same token, I'd like to see Dennis Allen take a little more risks this year, going for it on fourth down, being more aggressive, things like that. Hopefully this stat is telling of that too. That's something that needs to change for the Saints.
Well, yeah, I mean, philosophically, the Saints cannot, and this is something that Jake talked about constantly this year, just cannot be as conservative as they were. Both in terms of, like you said, like risk-taking with like fourth downs and everything, but also just in terms of like pure philosophy. They've got to get more creative and be willing to push it more.
There's not really an excuse you can use for Derek Carr right now. Like he has a setup. Like he's got the receivers, he's got the tight ends, he's got the backs. Offensive line, you still got some questions, but it's not like it's the worst in the NFL. It's probably still somewhere in the middle tier because you've got a lot of draft capital in that offensive line. You have a defense, and so he's got everything he needs, in my opinion, to be successful. Like,
true,
he's probably got more pressure than most quarterbacks in the league, and that's a high pressure position. But with everything he's got around him, a new spot, his last spot, he had some glory days, but at the end of it, he was benched. So like this is a big year for him, and when you start talking about Saints playoffs and how far can they go, like quarterback's a lot of times going to be the most important player, but as we saw like last year, it can keep you from going to the postseason. It has to be something where he's the reason you go to the postseason if you want to have the kind of year that this roster says you can have.
100%.
I agree.
100%. And I think if you're a Saints fan, you don't have to be a football expert, hopefully, if things go well, to notice the difference with Derek Carr in there. And this is probably an oversimplification, but it felt like Jameis had a lot of problem pre-snap. Like he couldn't make the right adjustments to his protection. He'd always get blitzed, and it would be problems. And then Andy Dalton maybe could make those adjustments pre-snap, but then he couldn't step up and make the throw. Hopefully you see a little bit of both with Derek Carr.
Well, do you guys remember, I mean, I guess it goes now from like pump the brakes on Carr to a lot of people are like, Derek Carr's not any good. And obviously nobody knew what Drew Brees was going to be before he got here. But I don't remember the same type of criticism around Brees.
Well, I think the difference with Brees is it was just way, way, way earlier in his career, and he had struggled really out the gate. And then what did he have?
The Saints franchise was horrible.
Did he have one or two? Did he have one or two good years in San Diego?
He had one really good year and one okay year.
Yeah,
he basically started 4 years.
I mean, they drafted Phillip Rivers for a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like when I was looking at the numbers yesterday, and I get it, Carr played 9 years.
That's what I'm saying.
Brees
Carr's
only
more
played
of a known
4, but
quantity.
year by year average, Carr actually has him in every single category. So it's like it's one of these things, and I'm not saying he's going to be
where the
Drew Brees or
franchise
anything.
was too at the time. I mean, it was the Aints. I mean, it was a franchise that had very little postseason success, and it only came a couple years before you signed Drew Brees, and so the expectation for the franchise was incredibly low compared to where it's at now. Where over the last, since you signed Drew Brees, you've been kind of one of these standards and staples of successful NFL teams.
Wow, just amazing black and gold takes right there, Jake.
I don't think I've ever heard any takes that are better than the two guys that just gave you that take.
And you can keep getting them by going ahead and liking, subscribing, ringing the bell to get notifications when we post. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next OTB Saints.